But now that we've taken a look at the interface and looked at how we can navigate our way around our 3D views, let's actually create our first object. So jumping into 3ds Max here. So where do we go to create our first object? We go to the Create panel right up here, as we just talked about. So let's decide what we want to create. We'll create some geometry. We'll create a standard primitive, and let's just create a torus. So we'll click on the torus button. Now you can see that nothing's been created yet, but our cursor has changed and some new parameters have come in down underneath our torus. So we can choose the creation method, whether we want to draw this out based on the edge or the center. We could actually enter values in using the keyboard and just pop this in. Or we can change the values here in our parameters before we actually draw this out. So we'll just go ahead and leave these at their whatever settings they're at. And let's go ahead and just click and drag in our view. And so you can see as I'm dragging this out, I can change the size of this torus, let off the button, and now I'm just dragging without holding down any buttons, and I'm setting the radius values here. So these primitives, when you draw these out, you're going to have several different actions that you're going to have to take to create the final object. And I'll click when I get that where I want, and now I have that object. Okay, so if I want to create, let's say, a cylinder, we'd go ahead and select cylinder. We do the same thing. We click and drag out the base of the cylinder, let off the left mouse button, and then when we drag, we'll be dragging up the height value, and then click again, and now you've completed that object. Okay, now here in the Create panel, unless we want to keep creating objects, we'll want to eventually get out of this panel. So if we want to, we can just hit Q to get out of that, and then we can navigate around our objects and see those objects here. Okay. Now to change the values on these objects, instead of going to Create, we now want to, since they're already here, we want to actually modify those. So we'll go to the Modify panel. And now we've got our cylinder. You can see here in the modifier stack, we've got that selected. You can see the name here as well. And we'll talk more about adding modifiers to the stack. But right now, just understand that this is the object that we've got selected. And you'll see the parameters down here, whereas this used to be empty. If we don't have anything selected, that's empty. If we select our cylinder, you can now see the parameters that we can modify. So we can interactively come in here and change the radius of our cylinder, change the height, okay, change the number of segments, and you can see those change in our left and front views there for the segments, change the number of cap segments, which you can see change in the top view, as well as the number of sides. Okay, so a lot of different options that we can change. If we'd like to now modify the torus, we'll just select the torus, and we can change the radius 1, we can change radius 2, okay, we can rotate it, change the rotation of that, change the twist value. So a lot of different parameters that we can change here on our parametric primitives that we're using. Okay. Now let's go ahead, and if we want to delete any of the objects that we've created, we can simply select those objects and just hit delete on our keyboard to get rid of those. Now you can see we don't have anything else in our scene. So if we go back to Create, let's say now we want to create a torus, but we don't want to have to click and drag that out into the 3D view. Well, we can go to Keyboard Entry. We can choose to change the radius here. So maybe make that a radius of 10 and a minor radius of 7. If you want to change the move value here, you can. We can just go ahead and hit Create. And so that'll pop that right into our 3D view. We can hit Q, and now we have our object that we can go in and then modify to our heart's content. Okay, so depending on how you like to draw out or create your geometry, that will define how you actually want to go in and create that. So you can draw it out. Again, understanding that there are going to be several actions that you're going to need to take. Click and drag to draw out one aspect of the object, let off, and then drag out to create another, for instance, the height of our cylinder, so forth. Otherwise, you can go into the keyboard entry and actually create it in that way as well. Okay. Now, one thing you'll notice here, also I wanted to mention from our interface, is if you right-click on our object, we'll get a quad menu, which in this case it just has a top and a bottom, but in many cases it will have kind of 4 quadrants of tools that we can access. So just keep that in mind. When you right click, you many times will have the ability to access some tools that way. Okay, so again, once you've got your object created, you can zoom up on that object. You can see those divisions here. We can go to modify, change our radius, get the object exactly the way that we want. Can twist that around if we really want to. Can zero that out. We can change the number of segments if we want something really low res. Change those segments and sides way down so we get something really low res, or vice versa. We can go ahead and get something really high resolution by changing those values. And you can see we don't have any sub-objects or any control over this as far as the sub-objects of this, the points, the edges, the polygon faces. This is still a primitive shape, okay? And so that's a good distinction to think about, a primitive shape versus an editable poly or an editable mesh, which we'll talk about in the modeling portion of our training. But right now, just understand that this is a primitive shape that has a lot of parameters that we can go in and change after the fact. So at any time, we can come in here and change these values, and it'll change the shape, okay? And again, you want to create a new object. Make sure that you get out of your Modify panel, back to the Create panel, select the object that you want to create, and either draw it out into your viewport or use the keyboard entry to add that shape. Okay? So just have a little fun experimenting with creating different types of objects and drawing those out into your view, keeping in mind that you'll need to click and drag a few times. It won't just kind of pull out automatically. Sometimes you'll have to click and drag and then click and then drag out another dimension of that object, for instance, the height of a cylinder, so forth. So make sure to keep that in mind and don't get frustrated by that. Okay? So once you've got a few objects created, the next thing that you're probably going to want to do is to start to move those objects around, manipulate those objects, rotate them, scale them. And so let's take a look at how we can do that in the next lesson.